Poštovani prijatelji, kolege i kolegice.
Dear colleagues,
najprije moram reći da mene zaista raduje biti
I must
ovdje
say
na
right at the
konferenciji.
start how happy I am to be here with you at this conference. A couple of months after the Belgrade conference held in May, and I'll repeat something I said there on that occasion, which is that I'm happy to see so many representatives of the Ministry of the Interior, our judges, prosecutors, as members, as participants, and the Ministry of Justice, of course, representatives. I thought this was a clear thing, no need to mention. Of course, the conference is not a purpose in itself. However, I believe it sends a very strong message on commitment, determination of the government of Montenegro to face the issue, to address the issue. And something that I cannot say is true of my own country, Republic of Macedonia. Why? It'll be clearer after you have heard my presentation, and the title of my presentation is Non-Implementation or Absence of Implementation of the Council of Europe Recommendation.
So we heard pretty much about the Council of Europe Recommendation 2010/5. And I'm going to go through the main areas that this recommendation talks about and kind of make a comparison. How is the situation in my country, in the Republic of Macedonia, in order to give you like a comparative overview and to sort of show that there are still countries in the Western Balkan regions who are doing fine and trying to cope with the challenges in the terms of gender identity and sexual orientation discrimination. First of all, as regards to the hate crimes, hate speech, and other hate-motivated incidents, Article 137 of the Macedonian Criminal Code uses an open legal norm, personal characteristics and circumstances in which the freedom of sexual orientation or gender identity can also be interpreted. According to our criminal code, if any person takes away or limits the rights of humans and citizens, in this respect, he or she shall be punished with imprisonment of 3 months up to 3 years. However, Macedonian Criminal Code unfortunately does not include a definition of the hate crime and does not entail the sexual orientation and gender identity as a separate ground, and that is something that we still need to be initiating and implementing. As regards to the freedom of assembly and association, this freedom is guaranteed in our national constitution and further enshrined in the national laws. These do not specifically mention sexual orientation or gender identity as a non-discrimination grounds. Article 20 of the Macedonian constitution guarantees the freedoms of free establishment of an organization, association, for exercising, protecting political... nema prevoda, okay. Se čuje sad? Da. So freedom of assembly, where I stopped, has been guaranteed by the Constitution and the establishment of organization or association for protecting political, economic, social, and other rights and convictions, and this has been incorporated into the law on the civil associations and foundations. As regards the freedom of expression, the Macedonian legislation also guarantees the freedoms of personal conviction, consciousness, and public expression of the thought. There is no particular protection, however, of the LGBT individuals in the law, so as this freedom in the criminal code is not mentioned and not protected as a basis for non-discrimination. However, the code prohibits the non-discrimination on the basis of other personal characteristics or circumstances, but this notion has not been tested in the case law and in the practice concerning the violations of the rights of LGBT individuals. In terms of the right to respect for private and family life, The family law in Macedonia explicitly defines a marriage as a union between a community life between man and a woman. The legislation does not give a people of the same sex the right either to marry or to live in a legally recognized community or partnerships. Same-sex couples are not allowed to adopt children, nor entitled to assisted reproduction and cannot benefit from these provisions. There is no legislation pertaining to the transgender issues at all, and the status of the transgender persons in terms of the official change of name and gender is yet unclear in the Macedonian legislation. We did have an attempt to consider the draft law on the registered partnerships, and we hope that in the near future the same-sex couples would have the same right as the heterosexual ones as well. In terms of the employment, social security, social care and insurance, the labor legislation is perhaps the only piece together with the health legislation that includes the sexual orientation in the non-discrimination provision and covers harassment with reference to the LGBT belonging. However, in Macedonia, still only the married couples have the right to social benefits, health insurance, and other benefits related to life in the community and working ability. In terms of the education, there is no whatsoever legal protection of LGBT individuals in the educational system, nor the legislation and sexual orientation is the objective, as the issues is not made a part of the curriculum. So there is a complete absence of the sexual health education, and that is something that the NGO sector has been vigorously trying to introduce within the primary and secondary school curriculum. However, the current situation points to the fact that in many obligatory and free choice students' books, handbooks, teachers' manuals, etc., we still have provisions and chapters that explain the sexual orientation and gender identity in a way which violates, misrepresents, or encourages persecution and opposes the legal protection against the LGBT people. Perhaps the situation is a slightly bit better in the field of the health, since the right to health care is provision to apply equally to all on the basis of the law on health protection. And notwithstanding the fact that the LGBT persons are not entitled to any particular treatment in the health legislation, the newly enacted law on protection of patient rights introduces the notion of sexual orientation in its anti-discrimination clause, thereby underlying the human rights in the field of medicine and health by explicitly including the rights of LGBT persons, thus leaving the legal grounds for realization and protection of the rights of the LGBT persons in the healthcare sector. Yeah. Sorry for that, you need to remind me, I'm always a bit fast. Pretty much the same situation is in the field of housing and in the asylum field. But when we come to the national human rights structures, I would like closely to wrap up and also mention something about the discrimination on the multiple grounds. Namely, in my country, all citizens, as in many other countries in the Western Balkans, by constitution are equal in their rights and freedoms regardless of the sex, race, color of skin, national and social origin, political or other beliefs, property, and social status. Although the constitution establishes a high standard of protection, respect and promotion of basic human rights and freedoms, none of the articles explicitly state, as I mentioned before, the right and the freedom of sexual orientation and gender identity. So these policies of not having a precise definition of the legal norms leaves an open space for interpreting or misinterpreting, better said, and misinterpretation of some of the non-defined but also not forbidden human rights to be taken as obvious. What we still need to do in terms of implementing this recommendation and improving our legislation overall in terms of ensuring protection of LGBT individuals is including a sexual orientation and gender identity as a separate ground, and also introducing the discrimination of the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity in the newly enacted anti-discrimination laws, so that the country conforms with the relevant EU acquis. This was something that has been quite widely discussed, and the Macedonian government, before the enactment of the law, has been quite well pressurized both by Council of Europe and the European Commission. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, they still decided not to include the sexual orientation. It was a rather peculiar statement given by our former Minister of Labour and Social Policy, who brought the act in the Parliament, saying that we don't have the sexual orientation and gender identity in the Constitution, so we don't need to have it in the law, you know, like, which was a very interesting thinking, considering that that very same Minister of Labour, like 5 years ago, enacted the Labour Code, which contains the sex orientation as a basis for non-discrimination. Furthermore, as the current status of the LGBT rights freedoms are neither recognized nor protected in the national legislation in Macedonia, although the basic rights and freedoms are guaranteed as a part of the overall contingent of the human rights and freedoms, there is still no positive legal regulation that can be applied in the cases of direct and indirect violation of the rights of LGBT persons. On the other hand, the discrimination against the LGBT persons in Macedonia can always be referred to as hypothetical or possible, because so far, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, there has been no publicly discussed case of a person who openly came out in public defining him or herself as a person belonging to the LGBT minority and advocating on behalf of his or her rights. So in order to strengthen the public perception that discrimination on the ground of sexual orientation is prohibited, the competent authorities should enhance the institutional protection of the rights of LGBT persons, build affirmative action programs, as an example the Montenegrin government is doing at the moment. I would conclude here that obviously not only in Macedonia, where I'm coming from, but also in many, knowing pretty much the situation in the countries in the region, the stigma, discrimination, and isolation closely follows the LGBT persons, mostly because of the inadequate legislation, lack of information about the legal methods of protection, and the fear of possible exposure of the LGBT status in the public. Therefore, all future actions should be addressed at improving the situation, be extremely public awareness oriented, as we're doing here in the conference, make known those sections of the domestic law and practice that explicitly or even implicitly guarantees the rights and freedoms of the LGBT people, yet make known and advocate for internationally imposed obligations on the Council of Europe member states. Significant influence in the recognition, improvement, and protection of LGBT persons' rights has been exerted by the international community, and we couldn't manage this way along without the support by the international community as such. Through the international documents, both the ones general in their character and the ones specifically dealing with the LGBT persons' rights, as we heard. Hence, this transposition of the international legal instruments in the national legislation can play the role of a corrective and accelerate the process of improvement of the LGBT rights through national legislation and practice, where the change in patterns without such an influence happens slowly and not easily at all. Thanks for your attention, and I'm be glad to answer your questions if you have any.